There are two purposes of compression, and if you look at it through this lens, it's much easier to understand and to know when, why, and how to use compression. So the two reasons are, one, to control the dynamic range of a signal, and two, to shape the tone of a signal. So let's talk about number one. The first main reason to use compression, and it's actually why compression was invented in the first place, is to control the dynamic range of a signal. Now, what is the dynamic range? Well, dynamics are simply the differences between the quiet parts and the louder parts of a signal. A dynamic performance, for example, would be like a classical piece of music. If you've ever had the experience of driving in your car listening to classical music, you might find yourself having to turn up when it gets quiet and then turn it back down when it gets too loud. The same thing is if sometimes maybe you're watching a movie and for whatever reason the audio with the movie is weird and you find yourself having to turn it down during the action sequences and then turn it up during the parts with dialogue. Well, compression essentially does this for us, and I'm going to show you right now with this vocal. So when it comes to vocals specifically, we're almost always going to have to use compression on vocals because when a singer sings into a microphone, they will just naturally have a dynamic performance. And so I'm going to play this vocal for you now, and what I want you to listen for is that with no compression on it at all, you're going to kind of hear the vocal kind of coming in and out. And so it's like the quiet parts kind of sound too far away. The loud parts are there, but it's like really abrupt and it's uneven. And it just doesn't really sound that great, and it sounds out of place, and it's not really fit into the mix. So I'm going to go play this, and then I'm going to go ahead and right afterwards, I'm going to turn on the compression, and I'm going to play that, and then I want you to listen for how it's a much more even performance. The quiet parts, you can hear them better. The loud parts are kind of turned down, but the overall volume is just kind of sitting right there in the middle, and the vocal will be sitting nice in the mix, and it'll just sound much better. So let's go ahead and play the uncompressed vocal first.
I was sleeping before we met, in the dark and tired. I was reckless, so I admit I started on my fire.
Now let's play it with the compressors turned on.
I was sleeping before we met, in the dark and tired. I was reckless, so I admit I started on my fire.
Now let's go ahead and talk about compression for tonal shaping. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and really quickly go through each of the parameters of a compressor. So most compressors will have these parameters. Some are a little bit different, especially the analog model compressors. They might work a little bit differently, but most will have these parameters. You've got a ratio, and what the ratio does is it controls how much compression that we're doing. So if it's a 4:1 ratio, that means that every 4 dB that goes above this threshold here, only 1 dB is getting let through. The attack time is how quickly the compressor goes from starting to compression to fully compressed. The release time is how quickly the compressor fully resets. So if a snare hits and then the compressor resets back to normal, this is how quickly it does that. The threshold just controls how much compression we're doing. So if I bring this down, as you'll see in a second, we can lower and lower and lower this to do more and more compression. There's the output gain. If you're going to compress something, it's going to get quieter because you're turning down the loud parts. Well, we can use makeup gain to turn back up the overall signal. And then there's the knee function, which really just makes the compressor either sound a little bit more transparent or more aggressive. And so a hard knee is going to be more aggressive compression versus a soft knee is going to be a little more transparent and more difficult to hear. Okay, so I have the snare here. Let's go ahead and take a listen what this snare sounds like with nothing on it at all. Now let's say that I wanted to take a snare or something like this and I wanted to kind of emphasize the attack or the transient of the signal. Where a way that I can do that is I can take the attack time and I can go to about 30 milliseconds or slower, and then I'll go ahead and lower the threshold. And then what this is going to do is, because this is a slower attack, some of that transient is going to get let through the threshold. It's going to emphasize it, and you're going to hear it's going to sound a little bit snappier. So let's go ahead and take a listen. I might not necessarily want that sound, but you can hear there's a little bit of a snap that's being added to it. That transient's getting emphasized. Now let's say that I wanted to actually tame the transient of something. I wanted, like, shape it down a bit, well, I can use a really fast attack time, something like, like this. And now let's go ahead and take a listen. And I'm actually going to turn up the makeup gain to match because it's going to be turning this down quite a bit. Here's the snare with no compression. Now with compression. Now you can hear there's a radical difference there. And so now let's go ahead and I will just slowly turn up the attack time while I loop this snare drum so you can hear the difference that it makes. So you can hear it got quite a bit louder there because the uncompressed, that transit is getting let through, is being turned up quite a bit, but you can hear a big difference there. And so this is one example of how we can shape the tone of something by using compression. And of course, there are tons of other examples out there, but I don't have time in this video to get to them. If you want to learn everything you need to know about mixing and mastering, go ahead and look in the description below and grab my course, Mix Immersions. I think you'll like it a lot. Go ahead and check it out. All right, thanks. I'll see you later.